is demanding minimum crop prices from marching on to the capital, New Delhi, this after talks with the government failed. Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. But first, Jordan's King Abdullah has said the world cannot afford an Israeli attack on Rafah in southern Gaza. Following his first face-to-face meeting at the White House with US President Joe Biden since the start of the Israel-Hamas war, the King called for a full ceasefire. But it comes in marked contrast to his host, who's advocating for a shorter 6-week pause in fighting. Shirley Sitbon has more.
Rafah has turned in recent months into a huge tent city, packed with 1.4 million people who have fled Israeli bombings in the northern and central parts of the enclave. Declared a safe zone only weeks ago, Rafah could soon be one of the most dangerous places to be in the Gaza Strip. World powers are working to stop Israel from bombing and invading the area, where it says it can crush what it sees as Hamas's last strongholds. In Washington, Joe Biden demanded that Israel present a proper plan to protect civilians.
As I said yesterday, our military operation in Rafah, the major military operation in Rafah, should not proceed without a credible plan for ensuring the safety and support of more than 1 million people sheltering there.
That's not enough for King Abdullah of Jordan, who wants the violence to end at once. Relocating displaced civilians and intensifying the bombing is not an acceptable option.
We cannot stand by and let this continue. We need a lasting ceasefire now. This war must end.
Defense officials and mediators from Qatar, the U.S., Egypt, and Israel are to meet in Cairo on Tuesday to negotiate a deal on a truce and hostages release. According to President Biden, all the key elements are already on the table.
Joining me in the studio is our International Affairs Editor, Angela Diffley. Angela, the big question is, with this intention of Israel to go into Gaza and embark on a ground offensive, where can civilians actually go to?
Yeah, we heard Joe Biden there saying they need to come up with a credible plan. And under international law, Israel has to provide safe corridors. As yet, nobody understands what that credible plan might be. Nothing has been made public. And Benjamin Netanyahu has talked about people going north, but it isn't clear how they would get there, whether they would be able to travel safely, and if it would be safe when they got there. That is all unclear. Philippe Lazzarini, the head of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, UNRWA, which is the United Nations agency on the ground in Gaza, which provides even outside conflict times services to the Palestinians there, or many of the Palestinians there. They say they have not been made aware of anything. And of course, at the heart of this, certainly not helping, is this open breakdown in relations between UNRWA and Israel. Israel says it has proof that 13 of the 13,000 or so employees of UNRWA in Gaza were involved in October the 7th. They say they're going to investigate that. Also, Israel, early on in this war, wanted to create a safe area on the coast, on the Mediterranean coast of Gaza, and UNRWA did not go along with that plan. They said that it would be, you cannot unilaterally declare a safe zone, but Israel feels that the United Nations does not cooperate, or UNRWA certainly does not cooperate with it necessarily. That is definitely complicating issues. Israel would prefer the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which deals with refugees everywhere else in the world, to take over this. It feels it would be a more neutral organisation.
And of course, this is all happening as a meeting is scheduled today in Cairo. It's going to include a group of people such as Egyptian officials, Israeli intelligence officials, people from the Qatari Prime Minister and members of the CIA. So what is expected to come out of this particular meeting?
There is a certain optimism, Joe Biden hinting at that there is enough on the table to work with. And the fact that Mossad officials and CIA officials are attending this meeting is seen to be something suggesting that they're getting down to details, and that is a positive note. On both sides, really, Israel's leverage, in a sense, is where and when it might go into Rafah. Hamas's leverage, if you like, is the hostages, and that is why Hamas took those hostages. It is using them as leverage. And so throughout any negotiations, those are the key points of leverage. As to how far it will go, it will be the same kind of thing as we saw in November, hostages for prisoners and a ceasefire. How long that will last is a point of contention, and we don't know how near they're getting to something a bit longer term.
So how is all of this impacting Israel's relationship with its neighbour, Egypt?
Well, you will know, Annette, as a former Middle East correspondent, that what is said in public does not always match what is said in private. And al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, came to power overthrowing Islamists. He is not a fan of Hamas. And it is possible that quietly he is very satisfied to see Israel doing the work of significantly weakening, if not eliminating, Hamas. Egypt does not want Palestinian refugees in Egypt. It's in dire economic straits. It already has 120 million people. He does not want anything which could cause further disruption in his own country. Publicly, Egypt said right at the beginning, we will not facilitate ethnic cleansing by Israel. This would be a plan to get Palestinians out of Gaza and leave them permanently in Egypt. That's what he said publicly. He's very wary of the Arab Street. The reality is that those tunnels going under Rafah between Gaza and Egypt are used for smuggling on both sides, weapons and goods, and they disrupt a lot of elements of Egypt's economy.
Angela Diffley, thank you so much for that analysis. And the US Senate has approved $60 billion in funding for Ukraine in a bill that the House Speaker has indicated will go nowhere in his Republican majority lower chamber. House Republicans aligning with the ex-president and 2024 primary challenger Donald Trump, promising to reject the bill as written, which also includes military aid for US allies Taiwan and Israel. Moving on and to Senegal now, and organisers have delayed a protest march that was to be held later today after authorities banned it. It follows a controversial move to delay this month's presidential poll in December and thus extend President Macky Sall's term. Opposition supporters have been calling for a massive silent protest in the capital, Dakar. Joining me now from London is Paul Melly, an Africa specialist at Chatham House. Paul, thank you very much for your time. To begin with, why did President Sall decide to delay the election, and how much support does he actually have for such a move from the Senegalese public in general?
Well, his official reason for delaying the election was that the supporters in Parliament of Karim Wade, an opposition politician who did not successfully qualify for the election, were protesting over they want an inquiry over the way that the Constitutional Court had behaved in deciding that this candidate, Karim Wade, could not run. But the real reason most Senegalese believe why Macky Sall has delayed the election is because it was becoming increasingly clear that his preferred successor, the government candidate in this election, the Prime Minister Amadou Ba, was set for defeat. Amadou Ba is a highly capable technocrat, a former finance minister and foreign minister before rising to the premiership, but he is not a charismatic campaigner who's good at the sort of street side of politics of reaching out to the voters. And after 2 Macky Sall terms and a lot of controversy in the last couple of years over the government's handling of demonstrations and complaints about political pressures on the judiciary, the momentum is with the opposition, and the Prime Minister looked set for defeat. So many people think that's the real reason why Macky Sall decided to postpone the election, to give himself space to see if he can find an alternative succession candidate. But this has caused such a huge row because Senegal has deep-rooted constitutional traditions. No one has delayed an election before. Everything has always happened on time in the past.
So which groups are driving these protests, Paul?
Well, basically a very wide range of the opposition, as well as civil society. Senegal has a sort of vigorous civil society movement who've been involved over the years in various campaigns over cost of living issues as well as questions of civil rights. But right at the heart of this are the key opposition movements, including that of Ousmane Sonko, the charismatic anti-corruption campaigner, also someone who has often resorted to a very inflammatory language himself, but who is hugely popular among youth. And he's currently in jail, and he was excluded from the election because of a conviction for defaming a minister in the government a few months ago, whom he accused of corruption, but then couldn't prove it. And so his supporters, Senegalese youth in general, are very fired up. There's huge youthful impatience, a big appetite for change, and people really feel very strongly about this. It's not really about Macky Sall's record in government. He's managed the economy quite well. He's created jobs. The economy is growing. Senegal has managed its debts carefully. Big investment has gone into rural development to help the half of the population who still live in villages in the countryside. So it's not really about that, but it's about his handling, if you like, of governance issues, civil rights, and political pressure on the courts.
Now,
that's what's angering people.
Now, ECOWAS, the regional body, has called on the government to restore the original election timetable and sent a delegation to Dakar to mediate in the crisis. Is the government going to heed their call?
It's going to be very difficult. I think Senegal is usually seen as one of the most stable countries in the region, a sort of pillar, if you like, of the political establishment in the ECOWAS bloc. And because of its long record of democratic government, multi-party politics, is normally one of the countries involved in crisis management rather than finding itself the subject of a probe itself. So the Nigerian president, who was due to come to Senegal yesterday as a sort of lead envoy for ECOWAS, he has postponed his visit. It's not quite clear whether he will come. It may be that the signal from the Senegalese government is that any possibility of progress or mediation is going to have to be something lower profile, something that allows people to save face all round. The two currently surviving former presidents of Senegal, both elderly gentlemen, Abdoulaye Wade and Abdou Diouf, they have both called for calm, pacification, and it's possible that Senegal's powerful religious leaders, very influential in Senegal, where religious brotherhoods, Sufi religious brotherhoods, have the allegiance of a very large part of the population, they may play a big role in trying to find some sort of calmer negotiated outcome. But the clock is ticking because Macky Sall's official term was due to end on the 2nd of April. And many people dispute whether his postponement of the election is actually constitutional. So if there isn't a resolution in time, either for him to hand over on the 2nd of April as originally planned, or for an agreed sort of election prolongation, rather than the one forced through Parliament by government supporters to the end of the year, which many people don't accept, things could get very difficult over the next few weeks.
Paul Melly, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Now, a new report by British MPs has deemed Downing Street's plans to expel asylum seekers to Rwanda as being incompatible with human rights. The bill is set to face another debate on Wednesday. Jenny Shin has the story.
It's a bill that's created a rift even within the British Conservative Party. The contentious scheme, which aims to expel migrants arriving in the UK to Rwanda, is returning to the debate in the House of Lords on Wednesday. It's the brainchild of Rishi Sunak, and the Conservative Prime Minister is determined to pass the bill in Parliament.
We've made progress, down by a third, but in order to fully solve this problem, we need a deterrent. That's what Rwanda is all about, and that is why I'm absolutely committed to getting this bill through Parliament and getting this scheme up and running.
Under the plan, which has cost £290 million so far, Downing Street would block asylum seekers arriving by boat in the UK and instead send them on a one-way trip to Rwanda. The UK Supreme Court has ruled the East African nation as an unsafe destination, as it could send victims of abuse back to countries they have fled from. Now, a new damning report by a key parliamentary committee warns the bill is fundamentally incompatible with human rights.
Having considered the evidence provided to us and taken into account other relevant material, we have concluded that the bill does not comply with the UK's human rights obligations and would place the UK in breach of international law.
The bill will face multiple attempts to amend it, and a back and forth between the Lords and the elected House of Commons that could foil Rishi Sunak's aim of getting the first flight to Rwanda off the ground this spring. But even if the bill passes, it's not yet clear whether flights will ever take off. The plan is one of the 5 key policy pledges of Rishi Sunak, who faces a general election this year.
Indian security forces have fired tear gas to stop thousands of farmers demanding minimum crop prices from marching onto the capital, New Delhi, this after talks with the government failed. Tear gas was used to disperse protesters near Ambala, some 200 kilometres north of the capital. The farmers are renewing their demands for assured crop prices in a repeat of those 2020 and 2021 protests when they camped on the capital's outskirts for more than a year. Earlier, I spoke to our New Delhi correspondent, Pavi Mittal.
The situation is tense and authorities are cracking down on these farmers who want to march to New Delhi as a sign of their protest and with their demands. As you said, police have fired tear gas on these farmers 200 kilometers from where we are. The city of Delhi itself has seen a lot of security being beefed up. The borders are all but sealed. You have barbed wires, fencing, and cement blocks. Large gatherings have also been banned in Delhi and parts of these neighboring states where the farmers will be coming from. In some districts nearing Delhi, internet has also been suspended till later today. Now, this march continues even though farmers' unions, and there are about 200 farmers' unions that are participating, held 2 rounds of talks with government officials. They managed some breakthrough on some demands, but the big key demands have still not been, there's been no commitment from the government. That's what farmers are saying. The biggest of these is that farmers want the government to guarantee them a minimum price for their produce. They also said that government had promised that it will do whatever it can to double farmers' incomes. Farmers say that their protest is not going to stop and that on Friday, which is the 16th, they plan to hold strikes across the country. There will be no farm work or shops will also be closed, and they plan to block major highways in India.
And French authorities are planning to revoke birthright citizenship on the Indian Ocean island of Mayotte. The island has been struggling with both social unrest and a crippling migration crisis. It also is France's poorest overseas territory. Catherine Kedder-Clifford reports.
A controversial reform for French overseas territory, Mayotte. Visiting the island on Sunday, Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin announced the end of the droit du sol, or birthright citizenship there. It's a first in recent history for France, which grants citizenship through both bloodline and birthplace, meaning any child born on French soil to non-French parents has a right to claim nationality on their 18th birthday if they've lived there for at least 5 years since their 11th birthday.
That means it will no longer be possible to become a French citizen if you are not the child of French parents. We will thereby cut off the attraction that the Mayotte archipelago might have.
Mayotte is made up of 2 islands that voted to stay part of France in 1973. The others in the surrounding Muslim-majority archipelago sought independence, becoming the Comoros Islands. Fleeing poverty and corruption, every year thousands of Comorans crowd onto small boats, looking for a better quality of life in Mayotte. Almost half the population of the capital do not have French citizenship. The only maternity hospital on Mayotte has the highest number of births of any such facility in France, and staff say most babies are born to migrants. Recent weeks have seen major local protests against insecurity and the migration crisis. Back on the mainland, political leaders on the right and the far right were quick to suggest the reform be applied across the whole of France, while the left denounced it as an attack on French values.
To Asia now, and jailed former Thai Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra is to be free from hospital detention, possibly as soon as this weekend, the kingdom's Justice Minister having made the announcement. The controversial billionaire, twice elected Prime Minister and ousted in 2006 military coup, was jailed for 8 years on graft and abuse of power charges back in August. However, within days, his sentence was cut to 1 year by the King. France 24's Matt Hout in Bangkok has more.
The Thai Ministry of Justice announced that former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra is now eligible for parole after serving 6 months of his sentence and for being over 70 years of age. However, for context, we have to take a step back to August of 2023 when Mr. Shinawatra returned to Thailand to face justice for stemming from abuse of power charges related to his time as Prime Minister. However, as you mentioned, upon his return, his initial sentence of 8 years was drastically reduced to just 1 year by royal pardon. And then, after receiving a very brief medical intake at the prison here in Bangkok, he was shuffled off to the VIP unit of a police hospital where he has remained largely hidden from the public and the media since. which has led to some outrage about whether or not he's actually even there, or if there's any transparency into the visibility or any visibility into this so-called justice being served. However, what we now know is that regardless of that, as you said, he could be released as early, or will be released as early as February 17th this weekend. So on or around there is when we expect to see him leave the hospital.
Matt Hunt reporting there from Bangkok. Now, violence in Port-au-Prince has forced scores of people from their homes. It comes as Haiti continues to face gang violence on a daily basis against a backdrop of deeply rooted political instability. The United Nations says it's becoming increasingly concerned by the worsening violence.
Walking to the closest place that could be safe for them. These residents of Port-au-Prince had to flee their homes after their neighborhoods were attacked by gangs. Their goal, reaching the closest police station.
Criminals entered our neighborhoods at 3 in the morning and started shooting at us. Not even the children were spared. Criminals have kidnapped people. We were forced to take refuge here because we have nowhere else to go.
We left by foot. The criminals forced us to flee. Last time, they looted our houses. They were back today. We were forced to leave and seek shelter. They control the whole area.
With just their bare hands to take everything they could, many carried their children away from the violence, but some could not even save all of them.
We're on the street with nothing in our arms but our babies. We do not know where to go. I had to leave our other children behind and don't know if anyone is going to look after them.
Haiti has faced spiraling violence, and protests have called for the Prime Minister to step down and for elections to take place. The UN says that violence has surged. More than 800 people not involved in gangs were killed, injured, or kidnapped in January. That's 3 times more than last year. Disruptions have hampered the delivery of humanitarian aid in a country where 44% of the population is food insecure.
French Guiana is facing its biggest dengue epidemic in 2 decades. The outbreak began in 2023 and has accelerated since the beginning of this January, with an average of 800 new cases recorded each week. It also comes as Brazil is seeing a peak in dengue cases in multiple parts of the country.
A public health emergency declared in Rio de Janeiro. As millions gather for the carnival, authorities are rallying to combat an explosion of mosquito-borne dengue fever in the city's favelas. At this school, officials have come to tackle an infestation.
This is a dangerous place. There are children around, so we're closing this over. We're putting some ray-finned fishes in here. They eat mosquito larvae.
The number of dengue fever cases in Brazil has increased fourfold. In January 2024, over 262,000 probable cases were recorded, compared to just over 65,000 in the same period last year. Dengue fever can be fatal, although most people don't develop symptoms. Residents are advised to prevent mosquitoes from gaining access to water so they can't breed.
I have plants at home, but we're very careful. I don't put plates in the pots. We water them, but we're very careful. We have everything covered at home.
Here in Brasilia, a field hospital has been set up to treat dengue patients. The Brazilian government has announced a free vaccination campaign targeting 3.2 million people beginning in February. Priority will go to children aged 10 to 14, the group with the highest number of hospitalizations.
And that's it for this edition. Do stay with us here on France 24.
I am Chinua Sontu, reporting from Lagos, Nigeria for France 24. Join me on all updates on Nigeria on France 24 news programs.
Chinwe Osondu, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Follow our international journalists on France 24. Douglas Herbert, Angela Diffley, Robert Parsons, Philip Turl, and Armand Georgian. From the newsroom to the studio or live on air, they are on standby 24/7 to analyse world events. Whether tackling historic, geopolitical, economic or environmental issues, our experts get to the heart of the biggest international news stories. They contribute to our special reports and scour the headlines for information. Follow it live. Follow the news. Follow France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
It's an annual celebration of ruckus and revelry.